Chapter 14. A Game of Croquet. As Alice walked, she heard a timid voice at her side saying, It's a very nice day. Alice looked down to see that she was walking next to the White Rabbit, who was peering anxiously into her face. Yes, very, Alice agreed. Where is the Duchess? Hush, hush, said the White Rabbit in a low, hurried tone, looking anxiously over his shoulder. He raised himself up on tiptoe, put his mouth close to her ear, and whispered, She's under sentence of execution. What for? Said Alice. Did you say, What a pity? The White Rabbit asked. No, I didn't, said Alice. I said, What for? She boxed the Queen's ears. The rabbit began, and Alice laughed loudly. Oh, hush, the rabbit whispered in a frightened tone. The Queen will hear you. You see, the Duchess arrived rather late, and the Queen said. The rabbit was interrupted by the Queen, who thundered, Get to your places at once! People began running in all directions, tumbling against each other. After a minute or two, they got settled and the game began. Alice had never seen such a curious croquet field in her life. The balls were live hedgehogs, and the mallets were live flamingos. To make the arches, the card soldiers doubled themselves over and stood on their hands and feet. Alice had never seen anything like it before, and wondered if she would be able to play at all. Alice's first problem was managing her flamingo mallet. She got its body tucked away comfortably enough under her arm, with its legs hanging down, but then ran into trouble. Just when she got its neck straightened out and was about to tap the hedgehog ball with the flamingo mallet's head, the flamingo would twist itself around and look up at her face. It had such a puzzled expression that Alice burst out laughing. When she finally got the flamingo's head down and was ready to begin, the hedgehog ball unrolled itself and crawled away. This is a very difficult game indeed, cried Alice, quite frustrated. The other players played all at once, without waiting for turns. They argued the whole time and fought over the hedgehogs. The Queen was soon in a furious fit and went stamping across the field, shouting, Off with his head! Or off with her head! About once a minute. The entire croquet field was in chaos. Alice began to feel very uneasy. She had not had any dispute with the Queen, but that could happen any minute. What would become of me then? She wondered. They're awfully fond of beheading people here. It's amazing that there's anyone left alive. Alice was looking around for some way of escape and wondering how to get away without being seen when she noticed a curious object floating in the air. It puzzled her very much at first, but after watching it a minute or two, she realized that it was a grin. It's the Cheshire Cat, she thought happily. Now I shall have somebody to talk to. How are you getting on? Said the cat as soon as it had enough mouth to speak with. Alice waited until the cat's eyes appeared, then nodded. There's no use speaking to it, she thought, until at least one of its ears has come back. In another minute, the whole head had appeared. Alice put down her flamingo mallet and began to tell the cat about the game, feeling very glad to have someone to listen to her. The cat seemed to think that enough of its body was now in sight. No more of it appeared. They don't play at all fairly, Alice said. They argue so much that one can't hear oneself speak. They don't seem to have any rules in particular. If they do, nobody pays attention to them. You have no idea how confusing it is with all the game parts being alive. For instance, the arch I'm supposed to go through next is over there, wandering about at all the other ends of the field. And I shouldn't have croqueted the Queen's hedgehog, but it ran away when it saw mine coming. How do you like the Queen? Asked the cat in a low voice. Not at all, said Alice honestly. She's so very... Just then she noticed that the Queen was close behind her, listening, so she went on, so very likely to win that it's hardly worthwhile finishing the game. The Queen smiled and walked on. The King, who had been right behind her, stopped to talk to Alice. Who are you talking to? He asked, looking at the cat's head with great curiosity. It's a friend of mine, a Cheshire Cat, said Alice. Allow me to introduce it. I don't like the look of it at all, said the King. However, it may kiss my hand if it likes. I'd rather not, the cat remarked. Don't be rude, said the King, and don't look at me like that. He got behind Alice as he spoke. "A cat may look at a king," Alice said. "I've read that in some books, but I don't remember where." "Well, it must be removed," said the king very decidedly, and he called to the queen, who was passing at the moment. "My dear, I wish you would have this cat removed." The queen had only one way of settling all difficulties, be they big or small. "Off with its head," she said, without even looking around. "I'll fetch the executioner myself," said the king eagerly, as he hurried off. Alice decided to go see how the game was progressing. She heard the queen's voice in the distance, screaming loudly, as usual. The queen had already sentenced 3 players to be executed for having missed their turns. That worried Alice. The game was in such confusion she couldn't tell whether it was her turn or not, so she went looking for her hedgehog. She found it fighting with another hedgehog. It seemed like a great chance to hit one of them into the other. Flamingo Mallet, however, was on the other side of the garden, trying to fly up into a tree. By the time Alice had caught it and brought it back, the fight was over and both hedgehogs had disappeared. It doesn't matter much, thought Alice, since all the archers have left this side of the field. She tucked her Flamingo Mallet under her arm so it would not escape again, and went back for a little more conversation with her friend, the Cheshire Cat. When Alice got back to the cat, she was surprised to find a large crowd around it. Some sort of dispute was going on among the executioner, the king, and the queen. The moment they saw Alice, all 3 demanded that she settle the question, and repeated their argument to her. They all spoke at once, making it very hard to understand what they said. The executioner's argument was that you couldn't cut off a head unless there was a body to cut it off from. He had never done such a thing before, and he wasn't going to begin at this point. The king's argument was that anything that had a head could be beheaded. The queen's argument was that if something wasn't done about it in less than no time, she would have everyone executed. This last remark was making everyone look very anxious. "Why don't you ask the Duchess?" Alice suggested. "It's her cat." "She's in prison," the queen said to the executioner. "Bring her here." The executioner went off like an arrow. The cat's head began fading away the moment the executioner was gone. By the time he had returned with the Duchess, the cat had disappeared entirely. The king and the executioner ran wildly up and down looking for it. The rest of the party went back to the game.